Yes, I want to explain a little bit really to begin with about why it was important for me to have a local launch here in Bournemouth. I can see lots of people I recognise and lots of people I don't really know that well yet. So those of you who do know me will know I grew up not far from here in Ringwood. And Bournemouth is really where I cut my teeth in activism. I joined the local hunt saboteur group when I was 15 or 16, and the local animal rights group, Dorset Animal Action, just a little while after that. And it's always fascinated me that this quaint little seaside town has got such a rich history of subversion and radical and revolutionary thinking and action, from pirates and smugglers through to suffragette strongholds over in Poole, Tolstoy's printing works in Christchurch, radical and progressive pioneering really. Mary Shelley, who one of the pioneers of the animal rights movement, the feminist movement, she had a home here. And of course we had the trade union movement founded just up the road in Tolpuddle. And this is true as well of the animal rights movement. There must be something in the water here, because in the 1960s we had one of the first hunt saboteur groups in the country. And we were the first group in Bournemouth to be on the receiving end of hunt violence, when an angry hunt supporter attacked the saboteurs with an axe and smashed up one of their guitars. And we might want to ask Ben later why hunt saboteurs carry guitars. It's still a mystery to me. But into the 1980s, this area was a hotbed of activity with the Animal Liberation Front. There's a high number of actions happening here, including a series of daring heists over at Bournemouth train station, where guinea pigs were liberated from trains en route to London universities. They were all taken and spirited away into loving and happy homes. And then into the 1990s, again, the action continued, and one of those, there was the mink fur farm down in Ringwood. They got raided by local activists from the Animal Liberation Front, just down the road from where I was living at the time. I was 12 at the time, so unfortunately it wasn't me. But one of the people that did do it was an undercover cop who fell in love with the movement and also one of the activists, and they've been in hiding ever since. And then we move into the early 2000s and the events of my book. And it probably won't surprise you to learn that Bournemouth was once more a hotbed of activity in support of the SHAC campaign. And some of you, not all of you for sure, but some of you will be wondering what the SHAC campaign was. So SHAC, or Stop Huntingdon Animal Cruelty, were formed in 1999 following undercover footage coming out of Europe's largest animal testing laboratory, Huntingdon Life Sciences, up in Cambridgeshire. You may now know it as LabCorp. The footage, it was the stuff of nightmares. It showed puppies being swung against walls and punched in the face, live primates split open from the throat to the groin without anesthesia. It was just a litany of violence and like I say, horror, the stuff of the worst horror movies. And so this campaign, SHAC, Stop Huntingdon Animal Cruelty, it launched with this idea that we weren't just going to protest this laboratory, but we were actively going to close them down. And to do that, we devised a campaigning model that was incredibly effective. And it really had two parts to it. The first part was that we made it our business to understand their business. So we looked at every single company that Huntingdon Life Sciences needed to survive, but that didn't need them, their customers, suppliers, shareholders, bankers, insurers. And one by one, we convinced them to join our boycott of Huntingdon Life Sciences. It was such an effective strategy that by the end of the campaign, Huntingdon had been forced to build their own laundrette, their own crematorium, their own gas supply lines. They set up their own courier company, their own catering company, and the government were providing them with banking and insurance and moves that haven't been seen for any other company before or since. And then the other part of the SHAC model was that we realized that we had to make this personal. So we recognized that a company isn't just a corporate logo and a glass facade. It's comprised of thousands of individuals. And amongst those individuals are the people that have made the decisions, the business decisions inside those contracts that have condemned, in this case, 500 animals a day to die inside Huntingdon Life Sciences. So we researched who these people were, and then we would show up in their boardrooms, in their offices, outside their houses, at their golf clubs, anywhere we needed to be to remind them that if the animals couldn't clock off at 5 p.m, then neither could they. So this model, as I said, was very effective, and while our intention had only ever been to find a way to close this laboratory, what the government in the UK and America feared was that we'd actually developed a blueprint to potentially end capitalism. And certainly The Guardian wrote at the time that we were succeeding where Karl Marx, the Baader-Meinhof gang, and the Red Brigades were failing, which, yeah, it wasn't our intention, but I'm sure we weren't that sad about it. And certainly other campaigning groups were emulating our tactics and our successes, from anti-logging campaigns to other human rights organisations, other animal rights organisations as well. And this was spreading, and it was effective, and yeah, the governments were terrified, and so they threw everything they could into trying to stop us. And so where does Bournemouth fit into all this? And to understand that, I think you have to understand how the animal rights movement was structured at the time. It was comprised of these local groups that were really autonomous collectives of individuals and activists in almost every town or city across the country. And these groups would act in whatever way they felt would be most effective and most fit their skill set. So there was no top-down instruction on what to do. We just took it on ourselves to do what we felt necessary. And that was mostly focused against local targets like fur shops or the aquarium or things like that. But we would join together behind large national campaigns such as SHAC. And when we did, as I say, we would do it in whatever way we felt most effective. So some groups would stand outside offices leafleting, others would stand inside offices leafleting, others would get on the roof or chain themselves to the front doors. And in Bournemouth, we had a particularly dynamic group, Dorset Animal Action. Well, yeah, it was incredibly dynamic, and the coordinators of the campaign, some of whom are here today, would always lead from the front and would always be the first to be on the roof or climbing a fence or trying to scale a gate. And that inspired me, and that inspired what, for me, activism is. And so while we were doing our local campaigning, one of our main targets here in support of SHAC was JP Morgan, who at the time were Huntingdon Life Sciences' largest institutional shareholder. They had a huge facility over Littledown Centre and a smaller red brick building up at Lansdowne. I remember the Lansdowne facility, often a couple of friends and I, and again some of them are here, we would run inside and just try and get leaflets to as many people as possible before we got evicted. And the last time we managed to do this, the security acted particularly aggressively, picking one person up and throwing them through a glass coffee table, throwing another over the front reception desk, sending computers and phones flying, in an action that in hindsight was probably more impactful than anything we had planned, and certainly caused a lot more damage than we ever intended to. But after that, the security found a scaffold plank, and every time we walked down there, if they saw the slightest glimpse of us or anyone who looked like us, they would throw the scaffold plank through the front doors, locking down the entire building. So of course we made a mission of going up there as often as we could, several times a day, just to watch the security shut down their own building and do our work for us. On another occasion at JP Morgan, the Littledown site, they had a company fair there, and it was a full-size fairground that took up most of the Littledown recreation ground. And as we turned up with our placards and our banners, we took the opportunity to walk inside and held our protest there. And once again, the security acted with fairly extreme violence, breaking a local hunt saboteur's ribs and picking up someone else and throwing them face first onto the tarmac outside. Me and my brother, meanwhile, were quite oblivious to all this, and we were running around having all the fun of the fair, running up the helter-skelters and sliding down with the security guards in hot pursuit behind us. It must have looked like a Benny Hill sketch, I think. And we didn't just stay local, we'd also go and join SHAC on their big organised days of action, which sometimes would be a march around a town or a city, other times would be a roving day of protest where we'd move from one target to another. And when we did join these days of action, we would always show up in our trademark minibus that someone had had the bright idea of painting sky blue with a massive Animal Liberation Front logo in black on the roof. I still don't know why or whose idea that was, but it obviously meant that any time we turned up to a protest, we would always be surrounded by police, and the helicopter would follow us anywhere we went and pretty much stop us from doing much of anything. And we weren't just notorious for our minibus, but also for always being late. For one reason or another, we never turned up to a protest on time. And one instance that I remember very clearly that this happened, we phoned ahead to tell them we were running late, and were told in no uncertain terms that we had no chance of making it to the first two protest targets. So to go to the third and wait quietly out of sight, as unsuspiciously as possible, until everyone else could arrive. Now this was Harlan into Fauna, which you might now know as MBR Acres. It's where they breed dogs for the research industry, and unfortunately it's very much still active today. So we turned up there in our bright blue minibus with the Animal Liberation Front logo on the roof, trying to blend in on this grass verge in the countryside, and we were probably there for about 2 seconds before the police arrived and wanted to know exactly what we were doing. So obviously we got out of the van and had a little wander about with the police following us along. And as we walked around the back, the police suddenly got a call on their radios. 100 people had arrived at the front gate. So the cop that was with me looked me up and down, all 9 stone of me at the time, looked at his radio and decided that he was probably needed elsewhere. And as he ran in one direction, I ran in the other, over 2 8-foot fences capped with razor wire, and climbed on the first roof I could find. So as the police were trying to work out how to get into the facility to get me out, without letting 100 protesters in behind them, they left me there for 2 hours. And I won't go too much into this, but it is covered in my book, and it was easily the most traumatic 2 hours of my life as I had to experience what those dogs go through. And it was an experience that really cemented in me why it's so essential to end this horrific industry. Seeing that myself, I will fight this until I die, to be honest, and that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. And it wasn't just our group that were active in Bournemouth. There was also highly active Animal Liberation Front cells here. In one instance, they tracked down Huntingdon Life Sciences laundry company who washed the bloodstains out of their lab coats to a facility over in Poole. And they went there and caused, I think, £1 million of damage to their fleet of vehicles. The next day, Huntingdon Life Sciences no longer had a laundrette, and that's why they were forced to build their own on site. It was also local activists from Bournemouth and Poole who rescued or were involved in rescuing 700 mice from Wickham Laboratories over in Hampshire from cosmetic Botox experiments. And then a few years later, another rescue in Gosport where goats were being used in deep diving experiments. 9 goats were freed from there. And then my partner Nicola and I, there she is, my partner Nicola and I founded an organisation and a campaign that we used to pressure those tests to end, and we managed to free all of those goats. So clearly Bournemouth was a very active area at the time, but it wasn't just Bournemouth. Obviously we were just part of a bigger puzzle, a piece of this jigsaw. And when you read this book, you will learn so many stories from around the world. We were active on every inhabited continent on Earth, and really when you read this book, you will be opening a remarkable chapter of modern history. You will learn how a cancer research scientist was the first person convicted of interfering with the contractual relationships of an animal research organisation. It's not a very catchy law. And then you will learn how executives from Huntingdon Life Sciences were taken out of a champagne breakfast 10 minutes before they were due to list their shares and told they were no longer welcome. How Pirates for Animal Liberation sunk a yacht, and how activists built their own rafts to sail across a canal to liberate dogs from inside Huntingdon Life Sciences. And in researching this book, I interviewed more than 50 people, not just activists, but also academics, journalists, undercover cops, corporate spies, and civil servants. And in doing so, I uncovered so much that a lot of it astonished me. And I served a 5-year prison sentence for this campaign. But I think the most shocking revelation was some documents I uncovered, secret government documents that were supposed to be heavily redacted, which hadn't been read by anyone else, and which prove a sinister government plot to eradicate the anti-vivisection movement. And so this really brings me to why I wanted to write the book. I've briefly mentioned it already, but as I said, I was in prison for this campaign, but I was far from the only person. And compared to some of my friends, my sentence was light. And as we were dragged from our homes and thrown into jails, we also found that our voices were silenced. And our truth, our reality was taken by the media, the police, the government, and distorted into a perverse lie. A lie that they screened from tabloids and headline news. It was taking actions that we had no knowledge of, played no part in, that possibly never even happened, and using them to paint us as the bad guys, as the villains, completely ignoring the real victims in all of this. And at the same time, taking this laboratory who had broken the law hundreds of times, who had a criminal conviction for their violence towards non-human animals, and who thought nothing of torturing those same animals to death for profit. They painted them as the good guys, as the victims even. And these are lies that have hung over my friends and I for 15 years. And it's probably not surprising that it was beyond time for me to set the record straight, to explain what we actually did and why we actually did it, and what they were doing and why. But more than that, the SHAC campaign existed for 15 years. That was 15 years of blood, sweat, and tears in which we tried and tested countless protest tactics and strategies. We built a campaigning model that clearly was very effective and enough to terrify governments. And for me, this is knowledge that all progressive activists deserve. This is a book that all progressive activists should read. As Richard Barnard recently, one of the founders of Palestine Action, as he said about this book should be dangerous. And their campaign was heavily inspired by the SHAC model and just really shows what can be done with it. But more than that, there is the true victims. There's the animals that die in their countless thousands inside laboratories that shroud themselves in secrecy and shadow, who hide behind razor wire fences and motion sensor cameras. These industries that fear nothing more than scrutiny. Most of the public do not know what happens inside animal testing laboratories. And many people within the animal rights movement don't know what happens inside animal testing laboratories. So in writing this book, I wanted to shine a spotlight onto this industry, to illuminate a little of what they do, and hopefully, with all of you, play a part in shining that light brighter and brighter as you read the book and share it with people you know, and hopefully pushing us towards ending this vile, vile industry. So I think I want to finish just by thanking everyone who helped make this book possible, as well as all of you for coming out and supporting it, particularly the activists of SHAC who inspired me at the time. And you know, we inspired each other to go out and throw ourselves against the razor wire and the police batons, to be dragged from our beds in the streets and find ourselves in police stations and prison cells across the world. I hope when you read the book, you will be as inspired now as I was back then.